When the series opens up, Viserys already has a child, a daughter. Viserys also has his brother Daemon Targaryen. To stave off any fighting between these two, as far as who would have the stronger claim, it's hoped that he would have a son, which would be a stronger claim than either of these other two. And so when the show opens, his wife is pregnant, heavily so, close to delivering, and a tournament is planned, right, in celebration of what's anticipated to be the birth of his son. Up to this point, his wife has already lost some children. They have this daughter, but she's lost some other children. And so while their daughter is like a preteen at this point, they don't have any surviving male children. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of expectations for this child to be a son, so that it can sort of sort out and put to rest any questions about the succession. What's supposed to be a joyous occasion, which is the birth of Viserys' newest child, which is hoped to be a son. But in the lead up to this, you have members of various other houses, allies and people that might be hoped to become allies with House Targaryen, journeying from their castles, from their various seats to come to King's Landing for the tournament, right? So it's a celebration of what's hoped to be the birth of the king's son, but also an opportunity for members of the various houses to gather together for the king to kind of strengthen his alliances and his power over the other powerful houses of the Seven Kingdoms. Where Viserys is kind of mellow and relaxed, doesn't really cause too much problems or anything like that. Never mind, he's the king. You know, he's like a cool, easygoing kind of guy. And it's like with this white Targaryen hair, which is like their trademark, it kind of reminds me of like young old people. Like because the hair is like, it's described as being white, but to me it looks like gray hair. So it's like you have people of like these varying ages with like heads full of gray hair. It kind of throws you off a little bit because they look like young old people. But Viserys is like this cool, calm, laid back guy, the peacemaker, doesn't really want problems with anybody. He's just going about his day, minding his own business, doesn't really cause trouble. And then you have his brother, Daemon Targaryen, who is, like, just look at his name, right? Daemon. It sounds like demon, and that's exactly what he is. He is just a troublemaker, an absolute rabble-rouser, and it's still early days when the show opens, but you kind of get a glimpse into or foreshadowing of how things are going to play out and how these characters are going to conduct themselves, what you can expect from them. So from the series, he's king, but he's like, ooh, he's calm. You know, he loves his daughter, loves his wife, is hoping for the birth of his son. You know, it's kind of like the peacemaker. He's definitely like diplomatic in his handlings, like dealing with members of his council, dealing with his brother. Kind of wants to see the best in everyone, doesn't really want to rock the boat to create problems. But then you have his brother Daemon, who is just a handful. Daemon is serving as the leader and commander of the City Watch. The City Watch, they kind of serve as law enforcement in that they enforce the laws that are set forth by the council. And Daemon also takes it upon himself as leader of the City Watch to carry out these sentences. So what we have is, in the lead up to the tournament, Daemon goes out into the rough part of King's Landing where, you know, the thieves and killers and murderers and rapists and, you know, prostitutes, not saying prostitutes are terrible, but like this is like the den of iniquity, pretty much. Takes it upon himself with the City Watch to rid the city of its criminal element. And just goes on an absolute rampage, you know, just killing supposed criminals left and right, maiming and otherwise harming them. But at the same time, we see his interaction with his niece Rhaenyra, where he's actually quite sweet towards her, right? Like he's, at least when she's a kid, like he's nice to her. So it's like there's kind of like this the character isn't all one thing, right? Even we see after he's, gone on this rampage with his underlings, the King's Council is having a meeting where Hightower, the King's Hand, is explaining what took place the night before, that Daemon went and just unleashed hell, in the town, just like murdering people left and right, maiming them and whatnot, in the name of the king, right? And so it points to that there's divisions here. Viserys is trying as best as he can to keep everything together, to keep the peace and whatnot, and he plays like the diplomat between, or rather the peacemaker between Hightower, his hand, and Daemon, his brother. Where Hightower is kind of pointing out to him that, like, listen, your brother can't be left, his power and authority can't be unchecked. He can't go about conducting himself like this. And so it's like you can see that the two of them would certainly butt heads. In the midst of all of this, you then have what's going on the surface and then what's going on beneath. Daemon has been out of town for quite some time and has now returned because of this tournament and whatnot. And he takes it upon himself to participate in the tournament because he is a fighter, right? Viserys is not a king that's going to fight at the head of his army. But Daemon is certainly a warrior. He's a fighter. And so he takes place in the tournament. And I actually found it quite telling that given the exchange that he had the day before with Hightower, or whatever time in the past with Hightower, and Hightower was trying to get Viserys to rein in Daemon, that Daemon takes it personally. And as a result, when he is sent out to, like, the tournament ground, because they're going to joust, and he's told to select his opponent, he chooses Hightower's son. And I don't really know how jousting works. Like, I've seen it before in, like, other TV shows and things like that, but, this was, like, so long ago, I don't know what the rules are. But it seems a little bit sketchy. You have him and Hightower's son charging at each other with these lances. At the first pass, he loses his lance, right? Like, Hightower's son connects and causes him to lose his lance. Like, it sounds like a car accident. On the second round, though, he lowers his lance, pretty much taking out Hightower's son's, like, his horse's legs, which causes the horse to flip over, throwing off Hightower's son. It just seems like poor sportsmanship. Hightower isn't pleased. It's a way of indirectly getting back at Hightower for, speaking down on him. As the tournament goes on, Viserys' wife goes into labor, and so, anticipating that, it kind of amps up the mood. But in the course of the tournament, Viserys receives word that there's some complications with the pregnancy. And asks if she leaves the tournament to go and be by her side. And I find it actually quite telling. It's a bit of foreshadowing what takes place from there. Where what's supposed to be this joyous occasion, the birth of this child, this highly anticipated child, that there's complications, right? The baby is breech, and the maesters are having a hard time turning the baby around. And as a result, the mom-to-be is suffering in labor, right? When Viserys leaves the tournament to go to tend to her, that is the right thing to do. But it's a bit of foreshadowing because the tournament then devolves into madness from there, right? Where it's pretty much representatives from the different houses that have sent, like, their knights to participate in the tournament. So Daemon is, like, representative for House Targaryen. You have Hightower's son, and then you have knights representing other various houses. And once Viserys leaves the tournament, it devolves into violence, and it's just like bedlam from there. And if you think about it, with each one of these knights representing a house within this kingdom, this tournament is representative of what's going to take place in the future. Viserys was trying to avoid future problems with the birth of a son. This question of the succession. The pregnancy being complicated complicates that, right? Because it's like if his male heir isn't born, it still begs the question of who is then set to inherit the throne. This question about the heir is now back up in the air, for lack of a better term. You see what I did there, right? And at the same time that this child's birth is thrown into turmoil with Viserys gone, there's now fighting between the knights from the various houses, right? And not like the expected fighting within the tournament. It's like all out savagery, right? It's like war on the tournament grounds. And it really points to what's to come. This tournament and the birth of this baby indicates that this is pretty much the beginning of the end for House Targaryen, right? It's serious foreshadowing. Because as the labor enters dangerous territory, Viserys is put in the position of having to choose between the life of his wife or the life of the baby, right? As basically the maesters tell him about the only chance for saving the baby's life is what's basically like a C-section. But remember, this is set like in an alternate world, but like thousands of years in the past. There's no anesthesia, there's no antiseptics, nothing's sterilized or anything like that. So basically, a C-section at that point in time is going to be cutting into this woman's stomach, cutting into her abdomen, and reaching in, taking this baby out, where it's unclear what the plan is going to be to staunch like blood loss. She's probably going to get an infection. It's like they're about to kill her one way or another. And so Viserys is faced with this choice of, do you try to save the baby or wait and run the risk of both of them dying? It's kind of cold-blooded, man, but as king, he makes the choice to save the baby, right? And maybe that's not being fair, because the reality is that it was either try to save the baby, or at least the way it's put across is that either you try to save the baby's life or you wait longer and run the risk of both of them dying, right? It sounds like the maesters didn't believe that there was any way to save the mom. And again, it's this interesting thing where at the same time that this dangerous labor is taking place, you then have Daemon fighting in this tournament, right? So it's like two different violent and dangerous acts. And it goes back to earlier in the episode where Rhaenyra returned from riding the dragon and went to visit her mom, who was not in labor at that time, but nearing the time to deliver, nearing the end of her pregnancy. And her mother told her, Rhaenyra states that she would prefer to be out on the battlefield, to be flying dragons and to be an active participant. But her mother tells her that as a woman within this family, within House Targaryen, her battlefield is the labor room, right? Her battlefield is in bed giving birth to future children and then thus making it possible for future generations. And so it's interesting that then just a few scenes later, you have this thing where you have this woman who's now in labor trying to bring forth what's hoped to be a future king, but would be the heir to Viserys' crown. That at the same time you have Daemon fighting in this tournament, right? And Daemon is getting that work. The tournament is sort of representative or symbolic of the various houses within the realm, right? Because each one of these houses has their knight put forward. And Daemon losing, it's not really a good look. It's it's like if he's supposed to be from the strongest house, but he loses the tournament, and then at the same time you have this baby coming into the world, and the mom dies in the process, the kid's survival is not certain. You have these two events that overlap, which point to the future collapse of House Targaryen. So Daemon is a perfect example of blocking your blessings, getting in your own way, where because the baby unfortunately doesn't survive, never mind it's a male, law and precedence would dictate that Daemon would then be the natural heir. When the council meets, it's pretty much agreed upon, but at the same time, having seen what violence and carnage Daemon could unleash, the King's Hand and some other members of the council are uncomfortable with the idea of him becoming heir. Never mind the laws. There is that, as has happened in the past with other kings, that he would just run amok and just be absolutely crazy. He makes the unwise decision to go out into, the red light district of King's Landing and to buy out a brothel, seemingly in celebration, which is incredibly crass. It's in poor taste, but also not very smart. The king, Viserys, is reeling from this. Members of the council, some members really don't want him to be heir, but yet the king speaks up for him, right? The king still regards him as, that's my brother, I'm going to ride with him. I believe in him. I think that ultimately he'll do the right thing. But in hearing about this celebration, it really speaks to Daemon's character, right? And his lack of thought. And as a result of that, the two have a confrontation, Daemon and Viserys, where Viserys pretty much commands Daemon to, forget about being heir, that he is highly annoyed with him for basically celebrating the death of this baby and his wife as well, and pretty much tells him to pack his things, go back home, and return to his wife, right, from whom he's estranged. And so it's like Daemon's actions have now put Viserys in the position where he's questioning his fitness for potentially becoming king. And the other option, which comes with its fair share of problems, would be Rhaenyra. Now, we all know that's going to bring problems, but it's pretty telling that when he has this confrontation with Daemon, when he goes to pretty much retake his seat on the Iron Throne, that it cuts his hand, right? And prior to early on in the episode, we see him with some maesters and the King's Hand, that he has a wound on his back that's not healing, right? It's got pus and all kinds of stuff. It's pretty gross looking. He states that, it's no big deal, that it's a result of, it's from sitting on the Iron Throne for too long. And you can take that two different ways. Either that, he spends too much time sitting, he's sedentary, and so, it's to be expected that he'd eventually get cut by the throne. Or you could see it as foreshadowing for the reality that he is now kind of being rejected by the Iron Throne. It's not really supposed to be his. And instead, he crowns Rhaenyra as his heir apparent, basically setting up a similar situation as to how he came into power. So again, there's all of this foreshadowing where Viserys and Rhaenyra are having a one-on-one conversation as he's pretty much telling her that she is now going to be his heir. And he tells her this secret that Aegon, who was the first Targaryen, not completely, but the first Targaryen to sit on the Iron Throne, he's the one that united the Seven Kingdoms, that he had this dream, this premonition, that a great winter was going to come and it could potentially destroy the world as they knew it. But if there was any hope for survival, it would require a Targaryen sitting on the Iron Throne. This dream that he had was called the Song of Fire and Ice, which is then the story and the title really of Game of Thrones, right? So that's like ultimate foreshadowing. That's like 200 years in the future. But now it's this secret that's passed down from king to king, or in this case now, king to future queen, where Viserys is telling Rhaenyra the role that she's now going to have to play as queen, right? Kind of paving the path for this continued succession, stepping in and becoming queen. I kind of like how this is its own thing with completely new and different characters, but that it also reaches back for us, but forward for the characters of this story to Game of Thrones, like how you have things that kind of tie together here. And so with that, I think like the show's off to a really, really good start. We'll catch up next time.
Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.